guys. Turned out, I didn't even know it at the time, but he was the CEO of this brokerage firm called Internet, which had just been bought over by Nomura, which is Japan's biggest bank. And so he asked me one day, he was just like, yo, like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm planning on going to this job fair at the Boston Career Forum and seeing if I can get a job in finance. And he's like, oh, why don't you come work for me, just get some experience, and then you'll have an idea of, what happens before your interviews. I was like, whoa, like really?
Hi, I'm Pranjal Malik, a full-time high school student. I am trying to learn from life journeys of successful professionals from various fields and bringing those experiences to you. So let's take this walk together.
Hi, my name is Reza Kunimoto. I am half Japanese, half Sri Lankan. I was born and raised in Japan, and now I live in Penang, Malaysia. So I guess the arc of my story is I went to international school in Japan. I was raised there. Went to university in Canada, and I guess the reason that you're interested in interviewing me is my career, which was in finance. So I have a 10+ year career in finance, working solely as a stock trader. So I was trading stocks, I guess it's referred to as equities. So I was an Asian equities trader. So I traded all the markets in Asia. So I was a Pan-Asia trader. And I worked at a brokerage firm for a little over 7 years. It was a firm called Internet, which was part of the Nomura group. And after that, I moved to JP Morgan Asset Management. And I was there for a little over, just about 4 years. And that was based in Hong Kong. So I was working there and ended my career there, where I quit and decided to move to Penang, Malaysia, where living costs are much cheaper compared to Hong Kong. And I have 3 children, so that was a big part of my move here, where I wanted to have a little bit more of a family-focused way of life. So when you're trading multiple markets, especially at a place like Hong Kong, you don't have much in the sense of personal life in spending time with your family. And so that is a trade-off. And I decided was able to make the move here. So my wife and myself, my wife who is also in finance, who you've met, we quit our jobs and moved here. And now it's been 2 years. And that is, I guess my introduction in a nutshell.
Okay. So where were you originally born?
So I was born in Tokyo, Japan.
How was the culture and living there?
It was great and stifling at the same time. So I mean, Japan is a very unique place. A lot of people travel there from different parts of the world, obsess about Japanese culture, whether it's because they like the food or they grew up reading manga comic books. It could be whatever. There's a lot of depth to the culture, and there's so many different interesting things that it's attracted a lot of interesting people from across the world, and a lot of people come and ingrain themselves in the culture. So I feel very fortunate to have been brought up in a place like Japan with such deep heritage, but at the same time, being I guess a younger person at the time, I found it to be quite stifling, where there's an old saying in Japan where the nail that sticks out gets hammered back down. So there are definitely societal expectations where you're expected to act a certain way. And if you're a younger person, as like I was, you kind of want to escape that. So for me, it was always looking to go to university abroad. And I ended up going to Canada. And after my university years, I did go back to Japan, but ended up leaving again a few years after that as an opportunity opened up in Hong Kong. So yeah, it was an incredibly enjoyable experience. Especially, I feel as though I straddled both worlds. I guess this is something you might be familiar with, like having gone to international school, which you're doing right now, where I was living in Japan. I was born and raised there, but I'm only half Japanese. I have a Japanese passport, and Japan's a very insular country, where if you don't look Japanese, you're never going to be considered Japanese, which for me, that was fine because I was going to international school, which was quite a privileged life. So it worked to my advantage. So I feel like I was fortunate enough, I got the understanding of Japan, and I got the language skills because I grew up there, and I just understand how things work there. But at the same time, my upbringing was actually fairly Western, where international school, like, I guess, more open education in that way, more exposure to the world. So I was able to benefit from having both sides of it. So I think it was an absolutely incredible way to be brought up, and I'm consider myself quite lucky in that regard.
Which class did you enjoy the most when you were in school in Japan?
In terms of high school, for me, I wasn't the most academic student. So I guess for me, it was whatever class was easiest, per se, where I was just trying to cruise by. But there definitely were certain classes I enjoyed more than others. Like for me, business class, I think part of it was the way it was taught. The instructor was fantastic. And yeah, so I liked business classes. I really enjoyed case studies, that sort of thing where seeing, for me, academic, I always struggled a bit with academic because, well, academics. Because there's a lot that you're told to learn, but it's not always connected to the real world.
Yeah.
So, okay, for me, sitting down learning some math equations, but, you know, I'm not mathematically oriented per se, but for me, I was always not able to draw that real connection. Okay, you have some word problems in something like math. Okay, you take the train to A, and then you're trying to, okay, that doesn't really help you. But something like business class, that for me was really interesting because we were studying case studies of real companies in the world. And I just remember certain things where it's like, okay, what was the biggest problem when McDonald's opened up in China? Where it's, oh, okay, like people in China don't understand the concept of lining up. It's just a completely foreign idea. So that's interesting, where it's like McDonald's had to, educate might be the wrong word, but teach people that when you come to an establishment like McDonald's, there's a line. You can't just cut the queue and have a mess. You gotta line up. So it's things like that, or what I still remember to this day, where it's like, okay, that was really interesting. And it's like other businesses, what are challenges that they face? And it's like businesses that we've all heard of. So that was really interesting for me. And then I guess secondary to that was, I was an avid reader, I still am, from a much younger age. And so for me, English literature, that was, I wouldn't say it's like I found it super fascinating, but that for me it was easy, where the teacher would always give us reading assignments that were quite interesting. And so I'd read them and didn't have any issues completing any of the assignments, like understanding it. That was very easy for me. So yeah, that was another course that I cruised by. And something else that I enjoyed were their electives, but that maybe was more social. It was like art class, photography classes, things like that. So that would definitely be more the area that I enjoyed.
So when you were in high school, were you worried about if you would get into a university or?
Yeah, so I mean, university, it was one of those things that I didn't really think about too much. Of course, it's in the back of your mind, but then it's like, okay, finally senior year sneaks up on you, and you're like, wow, I gotta sort these out. I wasn't one of those people that were, this is really, I feel embarrassed to say this because it's such a big part of your life, but I think like this is a reality in a lot of high schools where I think some students, especially the students that do well, have parents or others that are really involved in your life. So it's part of this conversation that you've been having from a much earlier age. You're not waiting to have that conversation until senior year. Where, okay, from ninth grade, you're really starting to talk about it. Not seriously, but it's there. It's a real conversation topic in your household or whatever it is. I think that's very important, where I didn't really have that. I think maybe part of it was just, my parents maybe knew I wasn't that academically inclined. My sister, she was 2 years older, she was very academic. So she was really like on top of everything. And she ended up going to like a fantastic university. But then for me, somehow it wasn't a real conversation starter. But I think part of it, because my grades weren't that good, is just like, well, you're not going to be going to like a really good school. So for me personally, I just didn't think about it too much until, yeah, kind of college applications season starts. No, not exactly that, but start of senior year, you're kind of forced to have these real conversations because you're going to be applying for schools soon. So for me, it's like, okay, like I knew college apps were a thing, but it's not like I gave it too much like in-depth thought, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, just in terms of how I ended up going to a pretty decent school, whereas the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, in Canada, which is actually quite well known. So in Canada, it's top three university there. So I mean, I was very fortunate with that. And how that ended up happening was just looking into the whole, okay, what are the options? I was looking, okay, the U.S. So for me, going to international school, I don't know if it's the same with you guys, but most of the kids went to, I wouldn't say most of them, but a significant portion of the students would go on to the U.S. for university. And then you have another set of students that would go to university in Japan. But kind of what you wanted to do was go to the U.S. So yeah, I'm looking at U.S. universities. I'm not going to get in a good one. And then we had a school visit, of course, not of course, but we had a college fair where a lot of the universities would come to our school, and then the gym would be set up so they'd have different booths, and you'd speak to them. I ended up speaking to the representative of UBC, my school, University of British Columbia, and just having a conversation with her, and it was actually really interesting. And what I learned then was the application process was completely different from the U.S. With the U.S., I'm sure you have some sort of idea where it's like it's looking at the average of your GPAs across all 4 years of high school, and then your extracurriculars, and then your SATs, and then essays, all this stuff. Whereas in Canada, at least as an international school student, sorry, not international school, but an international student, so applying to a Canadian university from overseas, you're in the international category instead of the Canadian category. And if you're applying as an international student, all they look at are your 2 highest grades. And of course, I have 4 years of subpar grades, but within all of that, in the 2 highest grades in your last 2 years. So, okay, English Lit, okay, that was an A. And then I was in math class for people that couldn't do math, Algebra 1. I got an A in that. So I was actually pretty set. So I submitted my application, got in, got a partial scholarship. It was good.
Do you have any tips for people who are panicking right now that are not sure if they're going to make it into university or not?
Well, I'd say keep your options open. Everyone around you might be looking into the U.S. I think this is one of those things where I've come across in life as well. Like 2 things. There's like, find the hacks in life. And if everyone's going here, you're not going to be competitive there.
Yeah.
In 99%, you're not going to be competitive there. Like everyone here is like playing the same game.
Yeah.
Trying to fight for that like 1 or 2 spots. Like if you know you're not going to make it there, you don't have a competitive advantage, don't do that. Like see what the other options are. So it's like, at least for me, I don't know how it is now, maybe the system's changed, but for me it's like, everyone's going here. It's like, Canadian university, okay, like what's that about? And you go in and it's like, okay, that's a bit of a hack, same education level as the US, there's a fraction of the cost, and I can get into a top university there, whereas if I go here, I'm just lower, not even middle, like subpar. So okay, so that was one decision for me that was easy to make. And if I was going to do that now, I would see really what the other options are. There are like Australia, like fantastic universities. It could be something similar to Canada. But then even in Europe, there are a lot of English universities, from what I understand. It could be a lot easier to go into. And then that would actually make you a lot more interested.
Did you become what you initially wanted to become, as and have a career that you wanted?
No. What I wanted definitely evolved and changed over time. So growing up, I always wanted to be a high school counselor, go work at a school. That was my ambition. But then once I went to university, Vancouver, part of the reason I chose it was, okay, like at the time, I said I grew up in Tokyo, so that's one of the biggest cities in the world. So when you think, like big city, Tokyo, that's, you think, okay, you don't realize how other, I guess, quote unquote, like big cities in other countries could be very different. So when I got to Vancouver, I don't know what it is, like 2nd largest city in Canada, 2nd or 3rd. So I was expecting kind of Tokyo type thing, but it was a much smaller city where you got a downtown. I found a lot of cities are like this, where you have a downtown area, which you can literally walk from one end to the other. And then when they say the population is whatever million people, like 10, 20 million people, they counting the suburbs around it.
Oh, okay.
So the city itself is quite small compared to a place like Tokyo or New York or London, where it's like the whole city is massive, whereas most other places are quite small. And so for me, yeah, my dream was always to be living in a small town somewhere and being a high school counselor, a very kind of quiet life. Then when I got to university, I was like, oh, okay, I want to actually be in a city. Like, I can't really, I can't handle it, but it was not really what I was interested in, or thought I was interested in, especially at my age. So I was like, okay, now that I want to live in a city, that changes the career thing, where you can't really be a high school counselor in a city. Like, you're gonna be struggling, I think, financially. So that started to change things. Where I was like, okay, like, I was always interested in reading kind of psychology. My major, as I mentioned, was psychology, and it's like, okay, kind of like a mix of things that I find interested is advertising, marketing. So then I wanted to go into advertising. I always thought of myself as quite more of the creative tendency, mindset. So I wanted to work at an advertising agency. That was kind of my dream, and at the time. And after university, I was very fortunate to have landed a job at an advertising agency. And unfortunately, that I didn't make it past my probation period.
Later, you get an internship.
Yeah, so just in terms of my career progression, so I mentioned before I went to university, I was unemployed, landed this job in advertising, didn't work out, unemployed, and then I landed an internship. So how that happened was I was playing pickup basketball. We just call it pickup ball. But yeah, so I was playing that, I'm unemployed, teaching English, which isn't very interesting here. It's not a career.
Yeah.
So not bagging on anyone that teaches English for a living, but you're in Japan, you're teaching English, you're there because you don't really have many other choices. You're doing it as kind of a fallback plan, which absolutely is what it was for me. So it's not like I was proud. I think maybe way back in the day, you'd be an English teacher and you'd feel more pride in it. But yeah, when I was doing it, it was just because I didn't have anything else to make a bit of money. So I was teaching English at the time, playing a lot of basketball. And the basketball crew I was playing with, they were older. So I had a couple friends my age, and then we'd go and play with these guys. They're like really good guys, but they're like middle-aged men, a lot of like middle-aged expats. And so I'd be going there like 3 times a week regularly. And so yeah, naturally like developed a relationship with some of these guys. And I didn't know really what some of them did, but some of them were pretty successful. And one of the guys turned out, I didn't even know it at the time, but he was the CEO of this brokerage firm called Internet, which had just been bought over by Nomura, which is Japan's biggest bank. And so he asked me one day, he was just like, yo, like, what are you doing? And at the time, I was interested in finance. So one thing that's interesting in Tokyo, specifically at international schools, was that a lot of the guys end up working in finance. It's one of those very desirable jobs, and it's going to international school and having that sort of background gives you a distinct advantage to getting into finance because you're able to, especially at a foreign firm, deal with the English side of things as well as understanding domestic. So yeah, a lot of my friends were in it. So I was unemployed. Actually, my girlfriend was working in finance, and so although like that was the last job I ever expected to do growing up, like ever, I never had any interest in this whatsoever. I was like, okay. And this was 2007, so that was, I don't know if you've heard the term bull market. That's when the markets are going up, and so that's when all the banks are expanding, things like that. And it's like a real hot job to be in. Like you have all these young guys making a lot of money, and you see them out. And so yeah, I was like, okay, I'm gonna see if I could get into finance. So at the time, like I had a plan that a big recruiting place was a job fair. It's called the Boston Career Forum. So it's in Boston in the US. It happens annually. I'm sure it still does. But a lot of the banks, especially for Japan and other places, would do a lot of their recruiting at this career forum. So I was telling him, it's like, I think he must have asked me, it must have been like September or something, or maybe August, September. He's, what are you doing? Maybe even earlier, July, August. And the job fair, I think it was later in the year, it must have been like October, something around then. I was like, I'm planning on going to this job fair at the Boston Career Forum and seeing if I can get a job in finance. And he's like, why don't you come work for me, just get some experience, and then you'll have an idea of, what happens before your interviews. I was like, whoa, like really? And that was my lucky break. So he offered me an internship at his company. He's like, yeah, at the time, I don't know if it'll be paid or unpaid. I'm like, forget that, whatever, I'll do it. And I ended up getting paid like a pretty decent amount, which was incredible. So it was a 2-month internship. So that was my foot in the door. So he's like, okay, like here's my phone number, my office phone number, call my secretary, and just tell her that I told you to call, that you're gonna do an internship. So of course, like very next day, first thing in the morning, call her, and then sort it out. So I had a start date. So that was my internship. And so it's a 2-month internship, just do what I can for 2 months. And that is just sitting behind bugging people with questions. So of course, as an intern, you're like a fly. So it's not like, also one thing that's different is when you work at a bigger corporation, like just take a bank for example, they have a proper internship program.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, they bring all the interns in, the interns come in, they take these classes together, and then they're rotated between the departments, and then they're taught things. And then the reason why the company invests in those interns is because they'll want to choose the best ones and give them a job. But my situation was very different, where just like, oh, okay, you're an intern, we don't have an internship program, you just come here, find something to do. That was my situation. So I'm like there, and you're sitting on this floor full of grown men who have no interest in you. So you got to make the most of it. So it's just, come by behind people, well, what are you doing? And then ask questions. It's so obvious that some of them have no interest, but fairly so. Some of them are just like so busy at the time. So you gotta be able to read people. It was okay, this guy is obviously really busy right now. I'm gonna leave him alone. And then the market opens. So in Japan, it's okay, the market is open from like 9 to 3 at the time. There's lunch break. So okay, so if he's super busy, then come back afterwards, and you're like, you're trying to make conversation. You have no idea what you're talking about. And you're like, oh, that was a pretty crazy day, wasn't it? And the guy's like, what the hell are you talking about? It's like, I don't know. Market was up, 0.5%.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? But you do that enough, they know you're trying. So you just got to keep doing it.
Okay.
So I developed a few relationships. Obviously, some of the guys who just considered me like to be a fly. I just sit behind them looking at their screen, and they're just like, go away.
Okay.
But then I hit it off with one guy. So he was, there were different types of training. In terms of what he was doing, it was something called program trading. And so he was a one-man team, and he was super busy. And he took a liking to me. One of those things where you can tell when, kind of be like annoyed when you walk over, but then he'd like take the extra length to answer your questions, that sort of thing. And I feel like a lot of people are like that in life. They might outwardly look pretty grumpy, but if you ask them a question, they'll take the extra time to explain things to you. So that sort of thing. So naturally I ended up like going to him a lot more, and he was super busy, and there was one thing where he was like, oh, okay, so there's actually one thing you can do to help me. And he's like, our systems, so if you think of a stock, you're buying a stock, you don't want to buy it when it's too expensive.
Yeah.
So he had a limit. This client that he had a limit. Don't pay more than 7% versus the opening, whatever it is. And so you could put in that limit, but this client was unusual, whereas like if it goes too cheap, they don't want to buy it. But there's nothing in the system to prevent that from happening. So he's like, okay, one thing you can do, here, let me log into this computer so you can see what's happening. Don't touch anything. But look at this. If you see anything move near 7%, tell me.
Okay.
And so that was my job. I'm like, I got something to do. I'm just sitting there, and I'm just like, for a few weeks, I'm just sitting there looking at the 7% every day. Just I'm telling him, well, this says 6% now. He's like, oh, thanks, and he has a heads up. So that sort of thing. So this guy ended up offering me a job because he was looking to like hire someone, and I ticked the boxes as a junior. So that was my entry into the industry. So he gave me a job, and I worked as the junior trader on his team. So yeah, that was my start. And going back to the food chain thing, where I'm like, okay, intern, you're useless. And obviously going in, you're like, that you're going to have a lot to learn when you start a new job. But one thing I absolutely remember him telling me that specifically, I still remember that at the time I was like, what are you talking about? Come on. But he's like, you're going to add no value to me for 2 years. I was like, what? You got to be kidding me. Come on, I'm going to be doing something, 2 years. But yeah, I see that. So for 2 years, like you got to be trained basically until you're really, yeah, of course I'm doing the job day to day, but you still got to, keep an eye on me. And then it's like not until after that you're really a substantial value to your team. So that was the other thing that was kind of interesting. Where I was like, wow, okay, like in terms of interesting things, like guys working in a company or just grown men or kids, but then two, it's like, wow, just because you have a job doesn't mean you're valuable. Like you gotta, yeah, 1 year work experience, that's nothing. That's like zero basically. So when you start a job, you gotta think longer term. You can't just be, it's different in high school, right? Or even university, where it's like you're thinking, okay, 1 year, that's a lot of time. And you're thinking, okay, when it's like now you're in a different world of, okay, you gotta be thinking 5 years from now. What do I see myself doing? That sort of progression. So yeah, that was my internship. And as I said, that landed my first real job in finance as a trader. So I was working there for 7.5 years, a little over 7 years. And the first 3 years was in Japan. And then I got moved, my entire team, we got moved to Hong Kong. So when we were in Japan, we were trading just the Japanese stock market. And yeah, I think back in the day, Japan was, when you thought of Asia, all the other countries were like tiny, 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 and then it was Japan. Asia equaled Japan. That's why it was a big thing, where a lot of the headquarters in Asia were in Japan. Whereas when I started working, Japan was kind of shrinking in terms of relevance, and that was kind of the rise of China, and then Hong Kong was a conduit into China, and then all these other countries in Asia too. And so you got Japan, where you're stuck trading just Japan. And then now you got Hong Kong, which is getting more and more important because it's a hub into China as well as trading all the other markets in Asia. So if you're young, like I was, now, okay, in terms of your career, you can just be the guy trading one Japanese market. Oh, actually, that looks really interesting and exciting if you're in Hong Kong and you're now trading all those markets. So in terms of like how you're going to make yourself more valuable, it's not just valuable, but it's also like excitement. Because when you're young, you want to learn as much as you can. You got this hunger, so you gotta feed that hunger as much as you possibly can, and just absorb as much information, experiences, everything. And it was clear that Japan was not where that was going to happen for me. It was Hong Kong. So I was doing everything I could to get to Hong Kong, and luckily an opportunity opened up. So we got moved there. So that was in, I think, my fourth year, started my fourth year of working at this firm. So I continued working there for a few more years, and then I moved on to a different company.
When do you join JP Morgan?
When was that? It must have been, I'm pretty sure it was 2015. Yeah, it was either 2014 or 2015. But right around there.
How was the job?
It was an excellent job. I got really lucky in getting this role. So just to take a step back, I was a broker before. So yeah, I explained like what I was doing as a trader, as a broker, but ultimately my job, I was a broker. And why is that relevant? Because broker means you have to rely on clients. So in that world, finance, client is like a god. So you come in, there's a lot of crap that you have to take because you're speaking to a client, and they can be grumpy or whatever. You just got to take it. There's nothing you can do. So you're getting yelled at on the phone. You're being treated like trash. They're your client. You got to take it. So that's sort of the job. And traditionally, like you're good at your job, yeah, okay, whatever. You put up with it because it is a very well-paying job. But you're a human, right? You're any normal person, you know, it gets to you. And so I wouldn't say you're bottom of the food chain because there are different food chains. So I explained how like on the trading floor, like as a trader, you're here, but then now you're being put down by your bosses and your clients and things like that. It's like, and it's also disheartening because I was at work at 6:30 a.m. every day, and it was depressing. And it's not like finance is one of those jobs where you find some greater satisfaction in doing it. You're doing it to get paid. So, you know, that's fine. It's a pretty well-paying job. That's why you do it. But it's not what you really want to do forever.
So you later leave JP Morgan.
Yeah.
to move back with your family. So
Yeah.
what do you do currently?
So right now, I trade options. So my background, as I mentioned, was trading stocks, and yeah, so that's very simple, right? You can imagine that. It's like, okay, you want to buy Nike shares. You have Nike sneakers. So you're like, oh, okay, cool. I'll buy some Nike stocks because I like the sneakers. I think the company would do well. That's as simple as it is. But then the options market is what's called derivatives, and this is fascinating because I never traded this before. So this, once I left work. Also, what's frustrating when you're working at a bank is you have a lot of restrictions. You're not allowed to do a lot of trading on your own. So I was never allowed to trade this umbrella of investments called derivatives. And so I had to learn it after I left my job. So that was like my project when I came here, like understanding this stuff. So I trade options. That's one thing I do. So when you think of a stock, I don't want to go into too much detail, but if you think of it like an insurance product, that's what people invested at. So going back to the example of Nike, people hold Nike shares, you know, that's just, or even Apple, whatever it is, Nike shares, and then oh, okay, they hold it because it's going to go up, or they believe it'll go up over time, but they want to protect themselves in case it drops too much. So let's say Nike shares are trading at 100 US dollars. They want to protect themselves anything more than a 5% downside. So it's trading at 100. They want to be able to get out at 95. So they'll pay a little bit of money to buy this insurance product. So even if the stock tanks 30%, the most amount of money they can lose is 5%.
Oh, okay.
So they buy this product, this insurance product there, and that is the options market. There are all these different things, but it's the most simplest explanation of what an options is. That's what it is. So I won't go into like more detail than that, but it's there's a lot more things you can do around trading with that. So I trade those at night. So I trade the U.S. market, and I do that pretty consistently. So that's one thing I do. And separate to that, I just invest. So if you're not working in finance, even working in finance, people don't fully appreciate this, but trading and investing are two completely different things. Trading means you're putting trades on, you're in and out, this sort of thing. Investing is, oh, okay, I believe Nike is going to do good over the next 10 years, so I will just buy Nike shares, and that's it. I'm going to hold it. So that's investing. So I'm spending time developing the investment portfolio, and separate to that, I got the options trading. So those are the two things I'm spending time doing right now.
If I hand you $1,000 today, in 1 year, would it turn 10,000?
So in terms of trading, investment, whatever it is, there's risk versus reward. So the more reward you want, the riskier the investment, traditionally speaking. Of course, there are those few opportune moments where there's something that people are really missing that make so much sense that you could get a return like that. But generally speaking, no. You're gonna wanna aim for something a lot more realistic. But let's say you got an investment portfolio of $1,000. Just keep it simple like that, right? Maybe 70% of it you want to put into something that you believe is safe. You'll put 70% of that, just the example I was giving, the US stock market. Or you really like Nike. You wear Nike shoes all the time and you're like, these are the best shoes ever. I love Nike. But you have an understanding of it. You're of this demographic that you know all your friends like Nike. You know that they make the best sneakers in whatever it is you're doing. If it's like football that you like or your basketball, they got the best shoes. You know that. You're confident. Buy Nike shares. Maybe if you have $1,000, you'll spend 700 of that, 70% in Nike, and then you got $300 left that you might be willing to take a bigger risk. If that goes to zero, you're like, whatever. But if it does well, then maybe that will more than make up all the gains you can hope to make in 10 years of owning Nike. So that's the other way to think about it. So yeah, if you're gonna give me $1,000, and you know what, Uncle Reza, do something with this for me. I say, okay, what is it you like? Okay, forget it. Put $700 in Nike or whatever the equivalent of that is, and then let's do something more interesting with that $300. For example, right now, Bitcoin. You might actually make that $10,000 from that. It's like those sort of things. But you don't want to bet your house on it. But there are those really unique opportunities that you might be able to make that sort of money. So it's not the normal, but they are there.
I want to end with two questions. The first question is, how much of your career path and success would you devote to your hard work and skill, and how much would you say came from luck?
So that's a really good question, but I don't think you can really clear-cut separate the luck and then the hard work, because I think one thing that a lot of people don't appreciate, even adults, so it's not just when you're younger, but even adults don't appreciate that luck comes from hard work. So yeah, you'll have a lot of these lucky breaks in life, or you'll see people have lucky breaks in life. But what's not appreciated most of the time is they got lucky because they put themselves in that situation to get lucky. Of course, I can say I think my whole life and career has been super lucky. And I don't want to trivialize that at all. Like being raised from a pretty good family, going to international school in Tokyo, oh my God, that's really unique. And so that's for sure lucky. But then it's just a progression of that. So I was unemployed. My grades were horrible in high school. I got lucky going to a good school in Canada. But then it was just a repeat of the same thing. My grades were horrible and I was unemployed. I totally got lucky getting into finance. Absolutely. Super lucky. I will never, ever try to minimize that luck. But I was very social. I was hanging out with a lot of people in finance. I was going to these pickup basketball games where a lot of the guys working there were in finance, like middle-aged, like pretty good level. I got so lucky, but that luck wouldn't have happened if I wasn't out there. I was going to try and go to this career forum, and so I had that as a conversation starter when someone asked me what I was trying to do. So of course I got super lucky, but it was up to me to put myself in that situation. And that's progressively happened throughout my life and career. And I think it's the same for anyone. And just for example, the JP Morgan job that came up. I didn't fully appreciate this until later, but it's that sort of thing where it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Where the guy, one of my colleagues was the guy who told me about the job. And he was working in the company. I was nice to him. He was a bit older. We weren't like best buddies or anything. But he was like, oh dude, they're looking for someone with your background and think you'll be really good. And turned out he knew a lot of the guys at JP Morgan on that trading desk who were doing the interviews. And so that gave me a distinct advantage where it's like when you have an interview for a job and you're not just going through a headhunt or something, but like through some sort of connection that automatically gives you a leg up. So now I've already made it to this level because they know I'm a good person. I've been approved by this guy recommending me. So I've cut through all that noise there. So that again is massive luck. But I was really nice to everyone and I worked really hard. So that's what gave me those lucky breaks. So yeah, absolutely so much of what I got from my career in life, I was lucky. But I can't assign a percentage.
Yeah.
I feel like it happened hand in hand with all the other things. And so for anyone who's trying to just figure life out, I'd say you have to not just wait for luck to happen, but you have to put yourself in those situations where you can get lucky. So if you're your age or even like university, you're not going to meet people if you're just staying at home playing video games or whatever. You got to be out networking. But it's like networking is the wrong word because it has this kind of negative tone to it where you're just trying to get something from people. That's not really the case. It's like, okay, you go out, you're playing basketball with other people, you're playing football, whatever it is, like dodgeball, some stupid thing, Dragon Boat. by being there, you're gonna meet people. And then, yeah, maybe you'll have some interesting conversations, and then that'll lead to something else. I think like what's interesting is you want to keep things open in your life. By meeting someone, you don't know where that's going to lead to next. He might introduce you to his friend. Maybe 90% of the time, nothing interesting happens. But oh, okay, I made a couple of new friends, cool, whatever. But then, 1 out of the 100 times, you'll have something life-changing that happens. But it's just a matter of getting to that 100th time.
Yeah.
Of doing something kind of interesting. I think through that, you're going to make yourself a lot more interesting of a person too. So I think that all long-winded again, but kind of ties back into that whole conversation on luck versus hard work.
Yeah. And the final question.
Yeah.
If you had a time machine, which moment would you want to relive throughout your career or life?
I think it would be high school actually. That for me was, I'm not going to say it was like the peak or anything, but that for me was like the most fun. But I guess it's a different sort of thing, right? Relive because it was fun versus go back to change something. There's nothing I really want to change because again, coming back to the whole question of luck, I feel like my whole life has been a series of lucky breaks that have somehow ended up one or the other. And I never in a million years would have thought that I'd work into finance, in the financial industry. Never. Like throughout college, never expected it. I was like, it's a stupid job. But then somehow I ended up in it, and somehow I actually did pretty good, which was surprising. I think I found my niche. I'm not that sort of person who's gonna do this, and like make these big deals. I found my area, which was, trading these hundreds of names, just really good at forgetting everything and just beavering away doing this. And I was able to do that for 10 years, making a decent living from it. And so I was lucky to find my niche. So like, I don't think I'd ever want to go back and change anything because I really think I would end up screwing something up along the way. But yeah, in terms of just pure reliving for the joy of it, it would be high school. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
No, not at all. Thank you. It's fun.